I wanted to begin by just asking kind of more personally, like, what's church been like for you recently? Because that might help me for context of how I aim further
Yeah.
questions.
So I think there's maybe 2.5, let's say, phases since the last time we talked,
Yeah.
and I'll work back pseudo backwards. So I actually haven't been to church since the Wednesday service before Christmas,
Okay.
um, largely just because of different people being sick. So that,
Yep.
and
We've
then
been
and
through
then,
that
and
too.
then I missed at least one before that. So in the past 6 weeks, I've been to church once, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just had host church for the first time in that same time frame last night. So I have the feeling, and I'm familiar with this feeling of mm, inertia. The image of being like in a rowboat or a canoe, you've taken the oar out of the water. So one of the things that I notice is that, at least for me, I'm not a monk, uh, or at least I'm not a very good monk. Uh, Without the modus, whatever it is, that the way that the Spirit uses the church to help move each individual forward in the process of sanctification, um, absent that modus, I then will feel myself kind of slowly eddying into some sort of like moving at the current of the river that I happen to be in, which may be zero, right? It may be eddies.
Yeah.
Um, and then, simple thing, like we happened to sit down and have dinner with one of our pastors and his wife, who are also our neighbors. And just that immediately, I could feel, and this is critical. Actually, I'm gonna make this an ontological proposition. Um, and I'm going to use the concept of consciousness, which I think is something that is legible in modernity. It doesn't actually have a strong Christian place
Right.
where that lives. But something along the lines of phenomenology, like the phenomenological experience of the interior of what your awareness is like. And consciousness is not static. Consciousness fluctuates. As you, like, for example, when you're surfing, there's when you lock in, when you drop in, something shifts in the quality of your consciousness. And if you've ever read George Macdonald,
Oh yeah.
Fantastic,
Oh yeah.
that is a consciousness changing experience. Like your consciousness, you'll have these moments where like you
100%.
realize that your consciousness. All right, so
Wait, have you read Lilith yet?
I haven't. I have it. I have it. I have a bookmark sitting
All
like
right.
a
You
perfect.
need when you need to tell me when you start it.
Okay.
Because I probably will like restart. I just read it again for like the fourth time. It's my favorite novel, I think, of all time.
Wow. Okay.
But
You
it's
know what? That's perfect. Yeah.
yeah.
So this is
Sorry.
exactly in this moment. Like, see how that works?
Yeah.
Because there's something that just happened that you might argue is how do you say it right? Like pure communications. In other words, you
Yeah.
have Lilith in your mind, in your experience, in your soul. I haven't, but there's a way for you to communicate. But there's also something happening where, as we enter into communion, as we enter into a quality relationship that is ultimately grounded in the Spirit, my consciousness changes, and it becomes more receptive to the signs of the Spirit. And so in this
Yeah.
dinner with my pastor and his wife, it just over a period of about an hour, I was like, suddenly all these insights started trickling in that had been waiting to trickle in for a month because I had been outside of the church context, entering into something like the church context. And of course, what I mean is into something like communion,
Yes.
had the consequence of changing my consciousness, which had the consequence of changing my ability to be in relationship with God.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Um, so, so I've noticed that viscerally because of the absence from church, right? So that's like the one phase, moving backwards, and hopefully,
Before you go on beyond the consciousness piece, I was just thinking of you probably haven't read much Owen Barfield yet. I don't know if
I
you
have I have
if you heard of
one of
him,
his
but
books, but I haven't read it. I've
okay.
got read like
Um,
three or four chapters.
all of his books are basically saying the same thing. So anyone you read will kind of be about this, but it is sort of like, and not in a bad way. It's sort of like in a good way, giving new images and metaphors to this sort of theory of consciousness that he has, which is basically like of the evolution of consciousness from a sort of pre-modern sensibility, which he thinks well predates. So maybe I shouldn't even say almost like pre-modern, because he thinks by the time we're reading the New Testament, things have already, like language itself has already been so modernized, I guess you would say, in a
Uh-huh.
sense, that the thing he's trying to capture is still sort of latent, even in the text of the New Testament. So you have to go even further back than that. Um, and I won't take time to explain it all here, but I recommend him to you because it's making me think now that church itself might actually be the way, or one of the only ways, to sort of hack the problem of consciousness that he sees. Because he thinks that we've been just super divorced from ourselves by
Yes.
especially modernity and
Yes, yes. Great. This is really
yeah.
useful. And I'm again feeling that note, like, God tapping and saying that was me.
Yeah.
um, this is critical. There's a bunch of stuff that will come out in a little bit. Let's also flag something like Saint Augustine and Anselm and participatory ontology that we can
Yeah,
bring in as well.
exactly.
And so there's a
Exactly.
lot of stuff here that I think is going to end up being critical to help us understand what it is that, like, what's the instrumentality of church supposed to be doing at all?
Yes.
And then that can help us understand how it should be formed. Um, one step earlier is around the time when my son was born, in kind of the aftermath of that, I had two really two unique experiences that happened simultaneously. One was a remarkable outpouring of help from the church. Literally, we talked about, my wife was in the
Yeah.
hospital for a
Yeah.
while, and it was touch and go as to whether she was going to ever be leaving the hospital. And I must have had at least one woman from the church in the hospital room with us continuously, and also another one helping with the baby continuously. And then when we got out of the hospital, with us in our house, then we had to leave our house and moved into the basement of it, grounds of the church, because our new house wasn't finished yet, with a
Right.
brand new baby and a wife who
Oh
was
my
sort of
gosh.
on the mend. So for something like 2 solid months, we were in the hands of the body of the church. All right, so that's one side. On the other side, I actually had my first real experience of church hurt, a very
Hmm.
intense experience of conflict with one, actually, of the members of the church that was almost, let's say from my point of view, almost perfectly designed to sear my spiritual naivete. Um,
That's a good
and
point of view to have about it.
Yeah, I can have the point of view. It doesn't really change the existential
Good.
consequences,
Yeah, exactly.
Um, and so as a consequence, and at the same exact time, our church physically moved. We moved from the building that we were in to a new church that was given to us by yet another aging, uh, like your text, a aging mainline church that
Yeah. Yeah.
decided to be grafted into what was happening in our church and gave us their facilities.
Oh, no way.
And like the 10 of them that were still around just joined our church body directly.
Yeah.
But as a
That's the way it
consequence,
should be.
we're up to like 240 people now. Like it went from
Whoa.
150 all the way up to 240 over like 3 weeks. And so we blew right past the Dunbar limit.
You're
And
not in the building you're in when I was with you.
that's right. Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah.
this is a
So
new building. This is an old mainline building,
we went we
and
went,
things
went
have
from
grown since
house
then.
church,
Yeah.
literally the whole church was in somebody's house, to in that building that you saw that
That
could
like
maybe hold
warehouse type of,
like 100
yeah.
people, like,
Yep.
an old holler square wooden 1970s, probably built by hand,
Yep.
uh,
Yep.
church, and then have moved to a more substantial, not yet fancy, but more substantial mainline church. I think it was
Yep.
Baptist, Buckeye Baptist. Yep. And they can hold 250 people, and we filled it all the way up. But in the process, blew right past the Dunbar limit, and
Yes.
weirdly, beautifully, unconsciously blew right past a whole bunch of thresholds in terms of the form that moved us from intimacy into formality. And I'll give you
Yeah.
one very specific example because it's just very clean, which is in the old church, with the one that you visited. Um, when Eloise, when during the service, when kids would go down into the kids' service, you would get up with your kid. I'd get up with Eloise, or usually Vanessa would get up with Eloise, walk over to the stairs, go down to the basement. The various rooms were set up, and they would do their thing. And if the kid needed to be watched, mom would stay down with the kid, whatever, right? Very like having it inside your house, like a house church last night.
Yep.
In the new church, you go in, you get a sticker. It has the kid's name on it. You have to print it on them. You have to drop them off. The parent can't actually go past the desk. Somebody else takes the kid out if the kid needs to leave. Like a complete shift into an formal, quasi-relational, right, institutionally relational thing. And it happened instantaneously, like just moving from one place to the other. And I talked with the pastor about it, and it's so interesting because he said, well, we've gotten so big that not everybody knows everybody else, and you may not necessarily know who's interacting with your children. And I paused for like 3 heartbeats, and I said, yeah, and that's sort of the issue. Like that's the thing
exactly.
that matters. But what's interesting is then this is not lost on the body. Like last night, actually at house church, one of the pastors comes to our house church, and we were talking about the size of the church. Like it's a very alive issue in the body. Like everybody's aware of it and talking about it. And he actually talked about the Dunbar limit, and he talked about maybe we need to be prosecuting some new way of church planting through budding. Like you bud the church, and you allow the church to separate and separate and separate while finding some way to maintain continuity. And so that issue, that question is like hyper alive right now.
Nice.
So,
all right, we're even closer in experience than
and I can feel it. Like when the kids, when somebody's sick, I don't feel, man, we're going to move heaven and earth to go to church. I'm like, yeah, whatever. It's fine.
Right.
Like I'll just skip again. I'll get there eventually. It has much less of a feeling like I had in the last 3 years of I'm chomping at the bit every Sunday to get into the church building. It's more like, yeah, it'll be good. It'll be nice. Kind of see everybody, do some singing, listen to some of the word. So, and these things are very tied.
It's almost like it's not like you were needed to be at the smaller version of church, but it's almost like that, like someone needed to see you or something. Like if you're not there, it's like a part of the body is missing.
Yes.
Whereas now the mutual need is not so high.
A simple analogy would be something like a quartet who's lost one of the members of the quartet is extremely disabled, whereas a full choir that has 300 people can lose 3 or 4 people and won't even notice.
Right. Yeah. Right. Which changes your whole relationship to a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's a really helpful context for me. I gave you a little bit of my context, but I'll just kind of spell it out a little bit further because it's more complex. I mean, part of the reason it's more complex is because we're in a city, big city, Virginia Beach. I mean, city is a strange word. It's like a giant, highly populated suburb that goes on forever with with no center. But so this is where I've grown up, and the kind of the picture I painted to you, it's a world with, dotted with mainline churches of all kinds in pretty much every neighborhood, but they've mostly kind of like been pruned off, and most people that I know who are Christians are going to some much larger non-denominational church. And there are also boutique non-denominational churches as well, storefront type of things. But that's where most of the sort of like action on a Sunday morning is. If you wake up and you see the traffic going somewhere, it's probably not going to the, Methodist church that was founded in 1910, but to one of the many probably non-steepled giant buildings along the highway, not in the neighborhoods, and including our own family. We go to a church. Well, ours is steepled. We have our mega church, which is probably about 6,000 people, has multiple campuses that they actually project the sermon on a screen in our campus which is maybe about 300 people, 2 services of like 150 to 200 each. And it is in an old Presbyterian church that our church bought in a neighborhood, not my neighborhood. I still drive 20 some minutes to get there. And so does almost everybody else. And so you have this,
Yep.
this effect of you're literally maybe 40 minutes away from a number of the people who are there living wise, who are there gathered for something that is also has many elements that are not only not local to that neighborhood, but not even local to the room, because the sermon is being projected from somewhere else. The announcements were, recorded professionally on a video in another studio somewhere else. That's been my kids' experience of church for, 7 or 8 years now. Besides when we're in North Carolina, the other 6 months of the year where we are in the church. It's literally, there is one church in our village. It's still called a village, Rodanthe, where I am. There's a Methodist church that's congregation goes back to the 1700s, but the building is, maybe early 1900s, beautiful little white building. And the congregation now, membership is probably like 30, maybe 15 people show up on a given Sunday. When I'm running surf camp, we have 15 staffers. And so we actually almost all of them come to church, even the ones that aren't Christians. They just are all like, somehow that's just become a thing that all our staff do on Sunday mornings. And so we, I think in a good way, because everyone seems to love it, sort of overwhelmed. We're literally more of us than there are of the like regular members of the church, on a Sunday morning. And my 2 girls sing in the choir is 4 people, 2 other women, and my and my 2 daughters. And they're, when we finished our 6-month stint and we're moving back to Virginia, they're crying. Every old lady in the place is like, doesn't want to see our kids go, doesn't want to see us go.
Yeah.
And mind you, this is not even I wouldn't call it like a deeply spiritual or evangelical church. It's just, it is spiritual and they are believers, but it's almost like what's probably happening in a bunch of dead mainline churches, what people call dead. I think we've had 3 different pastors over the last 5 years.
Wow.
Because they just, there's a lot of turnover and so it's not pastor centric. It's just sort of like, these are the people that live almost literally within walking distance of this building. It is the only building and these are our people, sort of thing. And so it's such a different experience, church for my kids. Everything that is excellent about our church in Virginia is not excellent there. And yet you can see my kids really connecting with the people, even with the tactile nature of opening the hymnal and finding the page and getting used to that little ritual of finding the page for each of the hymns. And so anyway, and now I grew up in the Episcopal Church, and so all of it is sort of warms my heart in some sense, because I have this sort of bias built in that my own tradition, it was more similar to that. And so anyway, over the years, I have become, it's not important to me, for example, with our church in Virginia, the mega church that we go to, it's not important to me that our church conform to my preferences about what church should be. Like a long time ago, I was just kind of like, I want to go where my wife can worship, where my family can worship. I don't need things to like do what I prefer. But then there's been this new ingredient over the last number of years it's different than preference. It's like, I feel heavy and convicted that I don't want my kids to necessarily be formed by this form of the what we have in Virginia. And so that's sort of a different problem than just preferring something else.
And you can use an analogy pretty simply, right? There's a difference between I don't like broccoli and you're not supposed to drink Drano.
Right.
Ostensibly, your taste buds may be involved in both experiences, but they're not the same.
They're not the same. Yes. And so I've had this, this long, all right. So there's my personal side of it. The more, let's say, community side of it is that um, I I think I've talked to you a bit about this before, but I have been a sort of pastor on the margins of our community of a few hundred people. It's actually quite a lot of people these days, not just that center on me, but that I feel somewhat responsible for, maybe 300-400 folks. And they go to different churches. And some of them have different, preferences or styles of worship or that they prefer. But I would say a huge number of those people, and let's say even the people that those people are connected to, that I'm not directly connected to,
Mhm.
are sort of simultaneously going through a moment of deconstructing church that they don't recognize as deconstruction.
Uh-huh.
In other words, I think I used the analogy when I was writing to you. The parking lots are full, but it's sort of like your Instagram feed is still full of content, but you sort of secretly all know that nobody wants to be on this platform anymore.
Uh-huh.
It's sort of like that.
It's
Like
actually a
people,
really good analogy.
oh, good, thanks. People are showing up to church. And granted, there's a lot of people that just aren't showing up anymore. I mean, I have lots of friends that just stopped going to church years ago. And it actually is a pretty good way to stop being a Christian. And people don't realize it at all, how connected the two things are. Because none of my friends were like, I don't believe this anymore. They just stopped going to church like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And then 10 years later, they're like, I actually don't know what I believe about God or any of this stuff.
This goes back to that canoe metaphor earlier, that you on your own don't actually have the modus capacity to continue to move forward in your relationship with God. And there is only forward and backward. There is no staying in the same place.
Exactly. And so I'm watching this happen, and I feel some responsibility for my community, and I'm just thinking the end of this is not good. Like we've already kind of like nobody believes in church anymore. It's like maybe a sort of simple, and I don't think overly cynical way of putting it. People are not happy and not whole within their relationship with church. And honestly, I think part of it is that something was lost when something was gained. Like when we shifted 30 some years ago from neighborhood mainline churches, which were maybe a lot of form without content is the way that I put it. Form without spirit, you could even say. We moved to like spirit without form or content without form. And now we are suffering from that. Or without paying attention to form, of course. There's always a form, but without paying attention to the form.
The time frame matters because certain lessons don't sink in until you've actually experienced the reality of it. Like for example, when I went through my first kid's developmental time, I was very active as a parent, and so combination of like camping trips and volunteering at school, fill in the blank. I got to know probably 15, 20 kids, their friends, well. Like I was mentoring kids, I was teaching them all kinds of stuff, and then at about 5th grade, that just stopped because they went to middle school. They diaspora to different middle schools. Obviously, not obviously, but the camping trips started to evaporate, and then and kind of life just sort of went on. I didn't really notice too much, and then I happened to go back to my daughter's high school graduation, and I kept hearing these names of all these kids who I had last seen 8 years ago when they were 5th graders, and realized one that time, like the time that I had spent with them, was existentially precious time in their lives and in my life, basically was wasted in the sense that the relationship was completely burned and I would probably never see them again for the rest of our lives. But it took 8 solid years for that because 8 years, the event had occurred already. The thing that I was feeling had occurred already, but I wasn't able to be cognizant of it until the time had passed for it to actually be carved into life. And so the kinds of things that are were already being lost, like as you say, there's like a shift from one mode of church to another mode of church that happens, 20, 30 years ago. Certain things are felt as being really positive because you're moving on purpose, right? There's a reason. And it takes 10 years for you to even begin to learn how to participate fully in the new things that you were trying to achieve. So it feels like an upgradient, but the things that are being lost are already lost, but you don't notice yet until you've done something like your kids of, the whole cohort of kids that first started in that transition have grown up into being adults, and they don't even have a consciousness of a whole bunch of stuff because it wasn't part of their formation. And then
Yes.
it lands like, oh crap, we lost a bunch of stuff because we didn't notice that we had left it, but we hadn't created the right form, and now
Yes.
it's not there, and now we're going to have to
Yes.
deal with that. So there you go. Yeah.
Yeah, this is something that we need to learn because you can see, like, I mean,
Wait.
even the Reformation, is like just like a big giant example of this
Yeah.
in so many
Yeah.
ways. Um, it just seems like quite a tricky thing to figure out how to correct something that is wrong without losing something that is
I'm tr-
right in the process.
yeah. The image, I'm trying to figure out what's the image is something like, actually, this is actually exact perfect because the larger form is beautiful. Do you ever see the old the movie Airplane?
Yeah.
All right. Remember where there's the scene where I can't remember whether it's the stewardess or the guy who's the pilot with the drinking problem, but you've got the inflatable autopilot
Mhm.
is kind of flying the plane. And then they switch it to pilot control, and he completely like can't. He's going all over the place. Plane's all. He switches it back, and it goes back to the autopilot. So
Yes,
in this
yes.
metaphor, the autopilot is like the Catholic Church in 1500, who
Yes,
can't
yes.
land the plane, right? He's not a real human. He can't
Can't
land the
yes.
plane, but he's actually able to maintain something that just sort of moves forward at a relatively steady pace. The Reformation happens. They flip it over. The reformers are like holding onto
It's
the yoke.
not on
Like, whoa,
autopilot.
crap. We just grabbed a hold a lot more than we thought we were grabbing a hold of.
Yes, yes, exactly. So, yes, this is like, this is a major human problem. It would be great if we could figure it out.
Oh man. So let's layer. I mean, let me layer two things. Layer? No, I'm putting them into the design box. So serious considerations that we need to be aware of if we want to think about the problem properly.
Yep.
One is the consequences of modernity for every aspect of persons, and I'll enumerate a few. One, as you mentioned, extends, city, no, suburb, yes. Like, so the ontological design, the place that we live and the context of the relationships we have with both the place and the people in that place. The formation of our mind, right? So the liturgy of the way that we live our lives and the way that that impresses itself upon our unconscious habits of what life is and how one lives.
Yeah.
The content of our mind, the actual ideas that have been dropped into our mind, formally and informally, that have developed over the last 500 years. So the consequences of modernity on all the different aspects of persons are almost hyperbolically horrifying. And we cannot address any part of the problem unless we address the whole problem and from the core first. So the experience that you have of moving from Virginia Beach to, what was the other place called?
Rodanthe, Hatteras Island.
Hatteras Island,
Yeah.
is a perfect example of a major difference, right? The difference between, hey, the content of this is formally not a sort of skillfully done church service,
Yeah.
but there's something about the simple experience of being with people who are our people. Like the feeling of that, which is let's just say tribal, just to make it simple, like the tribal feeling of relationality that is real in spite of anything else, versus the consequences of not just driving 20 minutes to a church where everybody else is driving 20 minutes. So nobody lives next to anybody else. But when you drive back home, you're also not living next to anybody else. Right? So
Right.
you have
Right.
no embodied context
Neighbors.
of what it means
Yeah.
to actually be neighbors, and therefore be in relationships with other people because of something that is existential, which is to say very root. And so
Yes.
this is a whole pile, and it is the reality. Like, it's the thrownness that we are in, that
Yes.
the huge fractions, like something like 99% of our lived context is antithetical to well-being in general, and therefore, by the way, antithetical to well-being in church. And so if we're trying to sort
Yes. Yes.
of paper mache church together, in this other context, there's a reason why we keep having problems. Like, hey,
Yes.
we're sort of putting a little Band-Aid on top of a massive. What's an even better way of thinking about it? It's like we're putting the top of a teapot on top of a volcano, and we're wondering why it keeps getting blown off. So that's one.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And then the second is, as far as I can tell, as far back as Augustine, the Western Church was actually sitting on top of an improper, a fundamentally improper, basic relationship with reality and with God.
Hmm.
So the reformers, and I'm not an expert in this, so I'm just really delving into it aggressively. Like I'm doing a lot of work, but I'm far, far from an expert. But the reformers basically did not reform deeply enough. Like the magnitude of the surgery that
Hmm.
needed to be done was at least 2 orders of magnitude deeper than they were able to conceive, and therefore did not actually achieve.
And you're
Um,
saying that because it was even needed this reforming in the time of Augustine.
yes, yeah. At
Yeah.
least,
Or at least some of it. Some of it.
at least as early as Augustine, the seeds, the sort of the critical wrong elements were being planted. That then everything else is downstream of that. So if you reform as far back as, let's say, Anselm, which feels like a very deep reform,
Yeah.
you're still 700 years too far away from being able to get. So Barfield, like when you said Barfield is talking about, hey, even as early as the New Testament, we're still in the wrong consciousness.
Yes.
And I think he's actually accurate. I think he's correct, right? So both of these points, right? The notion of the consequences of modernity, and the second is like the depth of the, let's say, error or the distortion, um, are both significant, like hyper significant. And so anything that we want to do, if we want to actually address the problem of church properly, and by the way, let me just maybe add a third. There, and you said this a couple of times. There is no Christendom without church. There are no Christians without church. So I'm going to make that a categorical statement, so we could just have it as a like an axiomatic. And so the
Yeah.
problem of church is irreducible. There is no not addressing that problem. And
Yeah.
so if we want to address the problem of church properly, we have to be able to think at a level that is able to encompass both of these profound design constraints.
Yes. Yes. Um, okay. So what do you think is like, where do you think we begin to address that now?
I can tell you.
Yeah. 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 Go. Go.
Um, it's funny. I can tell you. What I'm about to tell you is just the beginning of the beginning. So to put that way, we have to
Sure.
begin. We have to begin the beginning, which is to say, we have to be heading in the right direction in the right way. I mean, a
Yes.
simple example would be something like, if we're going to be crossing the ocean, we probably should have a boat.
Yes.
Now, if somebody's really focused on navigation and direction and velocity, and I say, hold, we need to think about shipbuilding first, they're going to be really frustrated. They're like, wait a minute, what does shipbuilding have to do with east, west, knots? Like, yeah, nothing actually. It's completely pre that
Yes.
conversation.
Yes.
But if you're having a conversation about direction and velocity before you've built a ship, you're just going to get wet. All right. So
Yes.
so the first principle is something like, we have to be able to acknowledge the necessity that if we haven't identified the design space properly, then everything we do is going to fail in some relatively short period of time, and in the order of like 20, 30 years, because it takes that long
Yeah.
for an existential error to sink in.
Yeah.
And then you kind of look about, and it'll have the experience. And importantly, this is, by the way, wow, what is this? This is a meta critique of operating under our own understanding, which is also, by the
Yeah.
way,
Good.
a version of paganism. This is the pagan problem, or the secular problem. We can put it the same. It's the same language. So the secular problem, the pagan problem, is that we can, in fact, achieve local success. We can design things that will work, kind of, and they'll feel like they're working for about half a generation. And then we'll begin to notice that they feel like they're not working, and then we'll realize that they were never working. And it takes about a full generation for that to land. And what you'll see then is a cycle. This is why secular, right? Cycles. Secular
Yes.
cycles happen because of this. It's baked in. It's the nature of what happens when we try to operate on the basis of limited human finite capacities.
Have you
So
read Seeing Like a State?
yes,
There's like, it's like a book of a million examples of that. Like, I think he starts with the example of forestry, where it's like, why don't we just cut down the whole forest, get rid of all the undergrowth, and then we'll just sort of like put trees on, an XY axis across this entire plain.
yeah,
And then for one whole generation, it's like, we're all going to be rich. Like, we're going to be the richest people. This is going gangbusters.
yeah.
And then it takes like one more generation of like, maybe not. And then by the third generation of trees, it's like, we're done. We've ruined the earth.
We've destroyed everything horribly. Yes. Yeah. So there we go.
Turns out trees had like way more uses, and the undergrowth was the whole thing that was keeping all the trees alive, and et cetera, et cetera.
Exactly.
So it's built into nature, what you're saying, not just into
it's
sociology.
built in. You got it. Built all the way in. And so part of it might be demoralizing, but let me see. Hold on a second. I can see this right. Yeah, there's two steps, and they're very subtle. So, and I'm going to use a very particular kind of language, which is a little bit confusing, but at least if you just kind of tag it. So one is going to be the language of meta, and the other is going to be the language of trans. And here I mean transcendent, not transgender. So because we don't want to lean on the meta, we can use the meta to help us bound certain kinds of things, but we're not going to lean on it, because that just means we're going to be making the same secular error in a bigger scope. So the meta tells us things like, if we're not able to contemplate the consequences of modernity, a 500-year error, and the necessity of addressing that at a foundational level, then we're lost. Right? The meta can tell us that. If we don't, the meta can tell us if we're not able to address the error of Augustine and the consequences of that, then we're lost. Okay, the meta can tell us that too, but the meta can't actually give us the way to properly address those all the way down to the root. Right? Just like the forestry problem, the meta will just give us an even bigger set of errors. So we have to be very careful. The transcendent is what gives us the right answer, but the beautiful thing is the meta points us to the transcendent here. Right? So, so I'll give a couple of like concrete examples. Oh, sorry. I'll stay at the right level of the meta. So that's one. Two, a journey of 1,000 steps begins with a single step, but it begins with a single step in the right way and in the right direction. So we have to say, okay, we're headed this way. We accept that we're headed this way. We accept that we're probably beginning something like a many generation journey. This is this is the cathedral consciousness in the spiritual domain.
Agreed.
Okay?
I think this is primary to the task.
Primary. And this is but it's beautiful because it's antithetical to the basic assumption of modernity, which is perfect, right? Because we're saying, hey, modernity, fuck you. You're part of the problem. And if this causes you to be very unhappy, that's probably a good sign.
Yeah.
And it's really neat because if you think about it, like the physical cathedrals that we think of, which La Familia is almost done, right? The Holy Family is almost done. We have they're physical, right? They're physical objects endeavoring to be embodied expressions of the spiritual church. And what we're saying is that we have to identify a way of adopting that same consciousness, but from the point of view of the spiritual, which ultimately will then give rise to the physical, and the physical will look completely different. Yes. Because that's the second principle. So the first principle is we have to actually scope properly and understand what the design constraints are. The second principle is we have to then recognize that this is almost certainly a many generational, and it may be like 8, 16, who knows, many generational journey, but we have to be able to take steps that are real concrete steps, the real, like they actually are moving us in that direction, and that they're in the right direction, and can find some way of producing something that is able to hand that off, right? The continuity, intergenerational transmission. This is maybe the third principle. Intergenerational transmission is non-negotiable. If our generation moves the ball forward, let's say 10 yards, but the next generation turns to the right or moves backward, then everything was a complete waste of. So there has to be a way of having intergenerational transmission that can maintain fidelity with the direction and ultimately upgrade the form, but without losing the fidelity. Right. So that's
Yes.
the third principle. Okay.
I
Good.
like this. I don't want you to lose your train of thought, but I just I like this because you're sort of stripping down the whole project to like you have to actually just like have in your imagination a step one, kind of like you said, like you have to have a boat before you're talking about the physics or whatever. But it's poetic to me because in the real situation that we're in, you already have to be sailing the boat that you don't have, but that you do have, I guess. And it's
Yeah.
basically like we're already on the ocean.
Yes.
Like you have to go to church this Sunday,
Yeah.
or maybe be a part of like making the church what it is this Sunday. But you also have to kind of like be on this crappy boat designing boats by thinking, what is a boat? Well, you're already
So let's
anyway.
bridge this because this is actually, I think, a very nice segue. There may be a few more principles that are foundational, but now's a perfect time to make the bridge. And so if I use and I'm using the language principle on purpose, because the language principle grounds in principality.
Yes.
So we're talking about principalities. We're actually talking about humans. All things, all of creation is governed by principalities, and humans have the ability to identify certain principles by which they will choose to be governed, right? And the failure of the secular mindset or the pagan mindset is that it endeavors to think that we can be the principality that governs the principles by which we are governing ourselves and do so well. But of
Yes.
course, as Paul points out in, I think it's Colossians, that shit don't work. That's my translation of the Greek, but I think you would.
It's a pretty good translation.
There is only one he who is the principality of principalities. So now we move from the meta to the transcendent. And it's a little bit banal because like any Christian's going to say, yeah, of course. But the point is, no, really.
No, really. Yeah.
Yeah. The key is no, really. All of the principles that I am articulating right now are only available because of participation in the shalom, shalom, the principality of principalities of the Lord Jesus Christ.
Yes.
And so we cannot, and we cannot navigate, we cannot construct boats. We don't build arcs on our own. We don't have the insight of, hey, let's build an arc and let's do some design constraints and figure out how to do that sort of thing. We listen to God and do what God tells us to do. And so that is the zeroth principle. Everything
Yes.
else is utterly dependent on that. And everything else is, because it's utterly dependent, everything I set up to this moment can and should be thrown out if it doesn't actually map to that
To
with
that.
increasing
Obedience.
strength and fidelity.
Yeah.
Let me see. Hold on. There's a little bit of a. Okay. So this is the antidote to the problem that you identify, which is we are sort of in a sinking ship in the middle of an ocean and don't know how to build boats and don't necessarily even understand what oceans are. Yes, all this is true. Fortunately, none of that really matters because God does. And
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
always already fully dependent on him anyway. And so it's
Yeah.
nice in some sense to be able to say, hey, we don't actually know how to do this thing. That's like shaking off modernity part two. Hey, modernity, you know what one of your biggest problems is? You think you know how to do this thing.
Yes. Yes.
We can now, with a really high degree of confidence, both through lived experience, like the people living third generation post forestry, and by the way, through straight up logical proof. And we now live in a kind of a post Gödelian world where we can actually reason can prove to reason that reason cannot reason the cosmos.
Yeah.
And we just have lots of actual experiences of, no, this doesn't work. So modernity can be handed, say, hey, get off the throne. You are not the king. You are
Yeah.
the emissary. You're the elephant. You're the thing that does certain kinds of jobs when instructed to do so. And so we have to relearn how to participate in the Trinity. So that's, we notice there's another major piece of modernity at the most basic level is being undercut. So the next thing that comes up is to shift over here and say, okay, what is this? We had this other design space about Augustine. So let me speak to that.
Yeah. Good.
Here's my understanding. Here's the what I have come to, and it's deep. So basically, the argument is something like something happened when our way of understanding Christianity and Christ and the teachings of Christ migrated from Greek consciousness to Latin consciousness. That there are a variety of characteristics that are presuppositions of Latin consciousness, aesthetic biases, linguistic consequences, pre-rational conceptual models that are part and parcel of Latin consciousness, that when you do a port, and I'm using the software development language, when I do a port of a functional Christendom that had developed in the context of Greek consciousness, and where Jerusalem and Athens encounter each other.
Yeah.
When you do a port of that over to Latin consciousness, a bunch of things occur that put you on a 1,000-year journey in the wrong direction.
Very interesting.
And I'll give you just a small number of examples. The key at the bottom, actually, the root, is moving from a participatory ontology to an epistemological relationship with being.
Yeah, that tracks.
And so the thing we must begin is renewing our ability to operate in and from a participatory ontology, which is, in a very simple way, is saying, yeah, you got to kind of learn how to be in communion with Christ and do what he tells you to do, but for real, right? Not mediating that through an unconscious epistemological layer that fragments the presence of God into an understanding of the presence of God. And that's the challenge of the West. And I'm not going to say that the East has the answer. I'm just going to say that that's the challenge of the West.
That's the challenge.
And it's really, really big because we have, for example, the notion of we have an Aristotelian logical base epistemology that is almost root, meaning we have the law of the excluded middle in our unconscious assumption of the nature of reality. Like we think in terms of dichotomous binaries.
Yes.
We think good and evil. Right?
Yes.
We think finite and infinitely. We sort of teleport past the mystery directly into the understanding.
Yes.
And our understanding,
because it's such a powerful technology to do so.
It's such a powerful. And the Romans, right, the Latin mindset, the Romans are like, yeah, we build empires. That's what we do. So we need to move into the technology side of things. We need to build roads. We need to build aqueducts. We need to build legions that can conquer. We have to govern. So their mind, the Latin mindset, was a mindset of administration. And the language of Latin over 500 years had developed to be able to operate a mindset that was oriented towards effective operational administration. And so when you move Christendom from the Hebrew Greek roots that had been stewarded by the apostolic moment to be able to produce something that was an embodied use of Greek, but was not mapped necessarily to the Greek mind, right? It shifted the Greek mind in a powerful way. You move that over. Augustine, though a genius of towering intellect, was not Christ, and therefore produced something that was a port that imported more of the Latin presuppositions than anyone at that time, as far as I can tell, was capable of truly grasping. And so then you go, so you're off on that. So we have to be very, very careful to notice all of those little minefields and traps. And so we have like example of person, personae, we use in English, right? That's a Latin. And the personae imports a juridical assumption. So the Latin person is the subject of a court case. The Greek hypostasis is a completely different animal.
Yes.
That's the word we use to translate it. But if we actually import it, we have a very different sensibility. Now we can, fortunately, at the tail end of modernity, are so addled that we, in some sense, have melted all conceptual structures. Like nothing makes any sense anymore, which may actually be healthy, right? We
This is
can
where
get
the postmodern comes in handy.
yeah, the
So,
postmodern comes
yeah.
in handy. It's like you guys are
Yeah.
insane. True, but from insanity, we can actually reboot.
Yeah.
We can maybe reboot
Yeah.
into sanity as opposed to be
Yeah.
stuck in an effective non-sane position. Ineffective insanity at least has to stop. Um, and the same thing is true of like subsistence, like substantia is
Yes.
not at all the same thing as oisa. Right? So there's a
Yes.
whole bunch of stuff there. It's very, very detailed. Now, of course, this is way over the head of the average, not even the average. This is way over the head of like an IQ 135. Like
Yes.
we're in a zone where the kind of the high end of the midwit category are going to be lost. So this then, by the way, creates a necessity of something like hold on, this is important. But the beauty of it, I'm just to say that the beauty of a participatory ontology is that it has nothing to do with concepts, has nothing to do with IQ. Right? This is not a
Right.
teaching
Exactly.
thing.
It's for the guy on the whole other side of the bell curve.
It is for the guy on the whole other side of the bell curve, who the salt of the earth. Right now, we're
Yeah.
smack dab in the middle of the Beatitudes.
Yeah.
Blessed is the guy on the left side of the bell curve, for he shall participate directly with God because his mind isn't getting in the way.
Yes.
So for those of us who are living on the wrong side of the bell curve, we're going to have to figure out how to get our mind out of the way and really relearn a participatory theology.
Yes.
And so that ends up being at the most basic element. So when I fuse these two principles, what comes up is very close to what you're experiencing in North Carolina. What comes up is something like, give me a second. Let's use your analogy of the forests and apply it to the reality of our food systems. Right, so we thought, hey, how about this? How about we actually clear all the land and turn it all into crops, monocrops, by the way.
Yep.
And then we deploy incredible amounts of embodied energy in the form of mostly chemistry to control and maintain and administer crop yield. And we'll spike calories and win,
Yep.
which in 1930 seemed like a really great idea. And by 1969, we're like, wow, we fucking killed it. Let's export this to everybody on the planet.
Yep.
And in 2024 with Maha, there's a little bit of an awareness of like, man, maybe that actually was a terrible idea.
Right. Right.
And there's actually an enormous amount of rewinding and rejiggering we're going to have to do to be able to think, okay, what is actual food? What does it mean? What does it mean to actually create a food system that is really going to work holistically? And this is the key, holistically, because, for the life of the world, it's so good, right? You know, when Christ says the bread is my flesh, the bread is the whole cosmos. Right? The bread is the wheat is the soil and the rain. Right? It's the whole
That's good.
cosmos
Yeah.
manifesting in a way that meets you as a human, in a way that is giving you exactly what is proper and needful for you. And that's
And not even just manifesting, but with your hands involved, because you have to make the
in
bread, which is
partnership,
the
right?
most offensive part.
It's the best. It's like you're in direct collaboration. The farmer plants the seeds. He has a role to play. He does
Yeah.
not grow the wheat. The wheat grows.
Yeah.
God grows the
He
wheat.
has to go to sleep. That's what
He
the
has to
kingdom
go
of
to
heaven
sleep,
is
right?
like.
So it's
Yeah.
we're going to be forced holistically. This is good and bad. We've had this conversation. We are in a crisis. The collapse of modernity, the end of modernity, is a crisis. It is a crisis across every aspect of life. It's a crisis at the level of food. It's a crisis at the level of demographics, right? Nobody's having babies anymore.
Yeah.
And not having babies is a terminal illness. If you don't have babies, then everybody who's caught by that illness is extinguished in their generation, and that's the end of that.
Yeah.
We nothing about the way that we live, our ontological design, like end of suburbs, fill in the blank, is vaguely A, sustainable, or B, participates in the actual thrivability of humans, which is to say, has nothing to do with communion. And so everything's wrong, and therefore everything's in crisis. This is the meta crisis. And therefore, by the way, we're at the end of being able to kick the can down the road. We simply have to begin the process of rebooting, which means that
Yes.
we can and must take everything into account. So now we're able to say, hey, wait a minute. This is a universal liturgy. Everything is liturgical by necessity, actually, because we can't answer the question. How are we
Yeah.
supposed to do
Yeah.
this? No fucking idea. We're sure that everything that we would use to answer that question is at least meaningfully wrong, possibly fully corrupt. Okay, great. What does that mean? We're going to have to participate with God. Look, we are, weirdly enough, we are literally Israel in the desert without water or food.
I would
We think
agree
we've got water
completely.
and food. We think we got plenty of water and food, but we are in fact not.
Yep.
We're maybe just crossing the Red Sea, not thinking about the lack of our supplies.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
who we are. So we're going to
Yep.
have to pray for manna. And we're going to have to pray for water. And
Except for the people that are still living it up in Egypt right now. They're not even in the wilderness yet. So they're even
yeah,
they're even a full step behind.
there's a whole step behind. That's right. Yeah, yeah. The people in spiritual Babylon. Well, I mean, we could just speak. The Old Testament is very clear on what happens there. So,
Yeah.
so this is
So
like the pill is strong. Like it's important. We could say, hey, we're not dealing with a micro problem. This is actually not really a problem of megachurch doesn't work.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's actually a tremendously gigantic problem of which megachurch doesn't work is sort of the last gasp of modernity.
Right.
And we now are in a process of having to reboot something all the way down to the most basic level, which is oddly enough exactly the story that Christ has given us continuously, which is
Hmm.
you are always of necessity completely dependent on me.
Mhm.
The only thing that is different is when you acknowledge and accept and enter into that, or try to pretend it's not true. And you can get
Yeah.
away with
Yeah.
trying to pretend it's not true for a while. Um, and you'll just continue to cycle through that process. But at a certain point, and of course, we have these experiences at micro level. Certainly, I have. We talked about this at house church last night. And it's like, um, I actually, my experience, I'll sort of sprint through moments of trying to manage my life through my own understanding, and then hit a certain wall. And that wall might be like my wife almost dying in childbirth. I'm like, whoa, like the experience of being blown out of that illusion,
Yeah.
realizing the degree to which I have no control over the things that actually matter, and the degree to which the only way of being in relationship with reality is to acknowledge, accept, and embrace my utter dependence on him,
Yeah.
and then just be there and see what happens next. And then of course, that moment passes, and then I step backwards into my adolescent fantasy of self-management, and then sprint forward on some idiotic journey. But again, we will fail. We're Israel. Like we're the generation. We're probably, sadly, let's hope that our parents were the generation who balked at going into the promised land because they saw a couple giants. Let's hope that was them, not us.
But
We're
it could
we're
be us.
it could be us. And in very well, how do I say it? We're very, very easily primed to make the same kind of error. Um, and by the way, of course, the generation that was traveling through the desert, which is definitely us, uh, made plenty of their own mistakes.
Yeah.
That was not a one-time issue.
Yeah.
So maybe we're the generation that's going to have to be bit by snakes. Maybe that's us. Um, and our children is going to end up fighting with the Amalekites and having to sit on the back end of the Jordan, and then Joshua will make a commitment, and then our grandchildren will actually be the ones, and maybe that's how it works, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter. The beautiful part is none of that matters. That's all irrelevant
Yeah.
in the big picture. The big picture is there's exactly one thing we have to make the level of, oh God, I hate saying this. Ugh, the heaviness of the reality of what I'm saying is so intense that I balk at the fact that I will fail so brutally in doing what I'm saying must be done, and yet what are you gonna do? We have to reconnect to that participatory ontology. We have to be able to cleanse the various things that separate us from that, We have to reconstitute the underlying substrate of what is necessary at the level of the whole of life, living life liturgically in a absolutely uncompromisingly holistic sense, right? Nothing
Yes.
is outside of the sacred. We must reconstitute. So I took a note. Community, place, church. These are irreducible.
Yes.
Any notion of church that is separate from place, meaning you live in the same place that is governed by your church, and community, you have actual existential life relationships, deep investments with the people who you live with and who you go to church with, is a sine qua non. Right? There's no other way.
Yes.
Um, okay, great. That's a kind of a design constraint that might be meaningfully addressable in this generation. It can't be successfully addressed in this generation because the headwinds are high.
Yeah.
Like you said, college. As soon as you flag college, what you're saying is decontextualize young people, alienate them from their local
Exactly.
community, embed them in a secular elite, and discombobulate them for 4 years in a maximally shiny way. Like, that sounds like a recipe for disaster. Indeed, indeed, it
Indeed.
is. Um,
My daughter's a year and a half from that traditional moment when that
Yeah.
begins.
I mean, but both of my daughters are now finished, more or less. My oldest is in her senior year, but she's going in the direction of grad school in Scotland, which has some advantages. Like I actually feel like the thing she's pursuing, and classical, by the way, she's doing classical archaeology. She'll be doing archaeology between 500 BC, 500 AD in largely
Nice.
the Mediterranean.
Yeah.
She's already going to be quite skilled in Greek. She's fluent in French. Um, my guess is she'll also become fluent in Latin. It's like, okay, that's at some level from a domain perspective, really neat. But the problem, of
Yeah.
course, is
Really
that
neat.
that's highly decontextualized. She will have
Right.
effectively no relationship with anybody who's in her family. We'll probably see her at the most for a few days a year for the rest of our lives, which is
Mm.
horror. Right? That's horror.
Yeah.
That should be understood as that it was one of the most horrible things imaginable. I mean, that's just a logical consequence of what happens when you get sucked into that rule of life, right, when that's where
Yes.
you are.
Yes.
My other daughter is stuck right now because she has a boyfriend who I think they're a very nice pair. He has a good family context in San Diego. It's where she grew up. She's a homebody. She doesn't want to leave that, but she still has a feeling like maybe she needs to go to grad school in genetics. And like, how's that work? Because that's what happens when you get
Yeah.
sucked into the
Yeah.
university context. There's so many currents that are pushing you away from wholesomeness that it's very difficult. And of course, like a cold, you're cut off from the context that would help you navigate that properly back, which is to say,
Right.
embodied real whole relationships. And everybody around you, all of your peers are in the same boat, right? So you have a pseudo consensus, and everybody, all the 20-year-olds who are talking to each other horizontally, because of vertical relationships, intergenerational transmission has almost been completely severed. They're conspiring to produce a pseudo consensus about what right action is, because their Overton window of right action has been delivered to all of them individually. And so they end up
Yes.
encouraging each other to get further from what is in fact right and true. So let's see. We need to blow
So
up college. It just needs to be scraped from the surface of the earth entirely. Something like that role obviously needs to exist, but you know, that's like saying food needs to exist, but we shouldn't actually be giving people, I guess, Skittles. Did you see that recent?
right.
Yeah,
Uh,
all these cyanide is perfect. It's like, hey guys, we've gone from being just bad for you to actually including poison. Did you see this? Like the Florida state?
no. No. What is this?
Yeah, the state of Florida announced yesterday that like some huge list of candies contain significant amounts of cyanide,
Oh my
or
gosh.
like 5, 10 times more than is sort of permissible. So well
And
into the
Skittles
spectrum
was
of
one
being
of
poison.
those.
Skittles is one, yeah, like Snickers bars, Kit Kats, like all the kind of like
Oh
Halloween
my
candies
gosh. Yeah.
uh, are in fact actually containing not just
Poison.
sugar and processed foods, but actual like straight down the middle medieval poison. Um,
Oh gosh.
they should do hemlock to be maximally ironic. Um, so we can pick off buckets. Like one is the global job market, right? Things that evaporate people from their embodied context,
Yeah.
particularly young people.
Yeah.
Bad. need to be torn up by the roots and replaced with something that orients people towards wholesome vocation in service to their church and their community.
Agreed.
Vocation, right, is the thing that God created them for, but also oriented towards a even deeper, richer connectedness in a larger context. And then we should be clear, like this is a partisan conflict against very large structures. So I'm completely in favor of absolutely everything that just destroys public school entirely. I'm completely in favor of absolutely everything that just completely plows the university system and the college system under, like it just plows it under to the point where we don't even notice that it's there anymore. I'm completely in favor of the absolute catastrophic dismantling of the global job market. And I don't want
Yeah.
anything to tempt my kids to go work in Chicago or New York City.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm completely in favor of anything that completely destroys the fabric of the large urban environments, like roving bands of cannibals and periodic explosions in New York City would be the best possible result. Because all those things are really bad and really hard to fight against. So you have to actually fight them all the way down. Like it's really significant. But of course, the flip side is even more important, which is the actual creation of extremely rich, wholesome, stable, liturgical contexts that replace all of the things that are wrong. So
yes, that is the problem. That is the challenge.
if you take away the Skittles, but you do not replace with blueberries that are grown in your neighbor's garden, then you haven't done anything. You've actually just starved to death. Yeah. At least Skittles will keep you alive for a little while. So there's that.
You could go farther and you could say, like we've had kids who have come to our surf camp whose diet, their parents will even tell us like in an email before they come, like, hey, he pretty much only eats goldfish and Pop-Tarts. And so then, when he comes, it's like, okay, like my wife will actually feel like a little mission. Like, what if we could get him to eat like just a little something? But if you actually just were like, no, you're eating broccoli, he would probably die. He'd just literally like throw up his whole, like if you moved from that diet to a good diet,
yeah,
it would be like, it would be too much. It would be like the withdrawal symptoms or whatever. It would just, your body would reject it. And so it does have to be some sort of incrementalization of health, I guess.
Yeah, we have to move things in a pace that can actually be a suffering that can be properly endured, which is, the God's.
Right.
But one of the things we talked about actually at house church last night was the phrase. It's funny because this term from the point of view of modernity feels brutal, which is that you deserve your suffering. Why are you suffering? You're suffering because you deserve it. You're like, that sounds really shitty. Like, man, what did I do to deserve? But the problem is you don't actually even understand what the word deserve means. The word deserve means merit, to have earned properly.
That's right.
He
disciplines those he loves.
He disciplines those he loves. You're like, holy shit. That's mind blowing. Like I am suffering because I have actually stepped enough into health that he is giving me more healing so that I can be closer to him. And by the way, more able to be of service. And so the problem is, like your Pop-Tart eater, we're so far from health that the amount of suffering we must undergo, right? Suffering just means undergo. The amount of undergoing to get to health is going to be a lot.
Yes.
And we can only move at this pace we can move, right? If something breaks, like you said, if he just dies of starvation or, ulcerated esophagus from throwing up broccoli, then you really haven't done anything right.
Right.
But it's crazy. Like when you bring up the status of these kids, like I'm shocked oftentimes when I speak with families now, or usually mothers outside of the context of my community and my church, who may actually live in this environment. I just don't see them very much. And I hear the stories of like where kids are these days. Like they're fucked up. Like it's crazy. Psychologically, physically, socially, like it's at a level where your average pioneer would not even be able to recognize what's going on. Like somebody who was suffering from dysentery and tuberculosis and was going to die in 10 years would be meaningfully healthier than the average 25-year-old now.
Right.
is brutal. Okay, well, again, this is because we are actually at the end of something that must
We're
end.
at the end of
We're
something.
in a
Yeah.
crisis,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
we have to. That's an address. Like, okay, let's deal with food. Let's deal with how do we make food that. I don't know if you looked at the soil issue, but the soil issue is a crisis of tremendous. So how do we make food that is going to actually be able to continue to be made for several generations in the context
Yes.
of water? Right, water's in a crisis. In the context of pesticides and in the context of pests, like all that. The beautiful thing, of course, is that we're not reinventing the wheel. There are good people that God has put in place who've been doing this work now for several generations. And we
Yes.
merely need to be able to identify, discern, and then upregulate, discern and upregulate what is more towards rightness and give more attention and energy towards rightness, and what is more towards wrongness and give less towards wrongness, and just continue doing that over and over and over again, recognizing, of course, that I will be eating something that is bad for me today, for sure.
Yeah.
Hopefully, I will be doing a less bad job, and over time, make
Yeah.
more good.
Incremental.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. So I have a couple of like high level things that I wanted to acknowledge about what you're saying, but then maybe move to something that's more on the ground. But on a high level, just okay. So you've got this participational ontology, participatory ontology. I mean, I guess would you say that's part of your sort of meta crisis theory? Is that, I mean, obviously we were talking about the church, but I can see how that whole loss of participation. In fact, Barfield calls it original participation. That's his term
Nice.
for what he wants to well, he doesn't say it's wrong. Like he doesn't say consciousness is wrong by the time we're in the New Testament, but he says that something is lost. He uses the example in John 3 about the wind, Jesus talking about the Spirit. Those who are born of the Spirit. The wind blows where it pleases. And he says, look, in the Greek, those are two words. Like they're two, not two words. There are two meanings. And everyone understood that, even though he's using one word, pneuma, right?
Yeah.
He's using the word pneuma, but everyone understood that pneuma meant the Spirit when he says born of the Spirit, and then the wind when he says blows where it pleases. There were two concepts there. And so that's kind of his way of saying, at this point, the language has already been split. It's still one word, but the meanings have been split.
Yes.
So then he's like, go further, and you will find that there was a place, you will find that there is a reason that those still existed as one word.
Yes. Yes.
Because, which is what he's getting at with original participation, basically.
Yeah.
And then
Sorry,
go ahead.
like this
Yeah,
is, I can't help it. I need to share this with somebody. You're the right person. As you know, I spent a lot of time working on pistis because the modern idea. I somehow managed to go even deeper in very Barfieldian sense. Like, okay, wait a minute. We have all these different words. There's a reason why the word pistis is the root of all of these different words. Like there's a reason why trust and faith.
Exactly.
Right? What I discovered was that there is a yoke. There's actually two concepts at the oldest etymological level that are connected. They're almost the same idea, but they are divided into two words. I can't remember what this one is, but in English it would be oath. And then this is pistis. And what happens is it is ontological participation. Pistis is ontological participation. Right? When I have come to the place where through my relationship with you, I have reached the point where it is proper and necessary for me to make an oath. That is pistis. Pistis leads to oath. Oath fulfills pistis. And both exist for the purpose of bringing a multiplicity into a unity, for forming a body. Right? So when Christ says, whosoever believes in me shall have eternal life, once you understand what that means in the deepest Greek, which, by the way, the Logos understands what that means in the deepest Greek. What he's saying is, whosoever so fully understands the necessity of forming ontological unity with me, that they make the oath of so doing and therefore are now part of my body, shall by necessity already be participating in eternal life.
Exactly.
That's just what it means. And it's, by the way, at that point, obvious. There's no, okay, that's true.
Yes.
You mean if I become part of that which is infinite and life itself, I will be alive forever? Yes, of course.
Yes,
How could it be otherwise?
Of course.
Huh. So
it's a
So
Logical necessity.
right, and it has nothing to do with what I have going on in my mind in terms of propositions that I'm willing to say yes to. Like those are
Right.
like so far down the tail end. So this is the kind of stuff like we can renovate. We can do some work. Like now in this generation, we can do some work of doing. I'll just call it the Barfieldian maneuver of
Yeah.
rerouting all the way down into the, what did you call it? The participatory,
Original participation.
into the original participation, which evaporates an enormous amount of theological and ecclesiological kludgeon. That is it's so much of what I've seen happen in the church over the past 1,000 years has actually been an effort to glue things, like to put Humpty Dumpty back together.
Yes.
But if we can just rewind back to the place where Humpty Dumpty wasn't off the wall yet, then
Yes.
we can start from that place. I mean, that's a weird way of saying it, but that's sort of part of the exercise. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Right.
Go back
No,
to
no,
where you.
no. That's really good. He has this other image. I mean, because you're actually doing this, so it's kind of cool that he uses this image. But and this relates to your daughter being an archaeologist in some sense. But of a fossil record, he says, like, just as the Earth reveals these different layers of what was, he says that human language is the fossil record of consciousness,
Nice.
and that
Yeah.
it's like stored in especially ancient poetry. He thinks that the poetic is a
Yes.
better store. It's like the dry caves as opposed to the wet. It's like the poetic
By necessity.
stores things
Yeah.
by necessity that
Yeah.
cannot be held in prose
Yep.
to the same degree, because it's using words in the way he thinks that words just are poems, basically.
Yeah.
And
Poetry is the crucible of language. Poetry is the
right.
forge from which words emerge. So that's you're capturing it at the moment of creation, which means you can capture the transcendent that is expressing itself clothed in the immanent word. You're actually literally sitting
Yes.
at Christ. You're sitting with Christ if you're able to sit in the poetic.
Exactly. And that is participation in a sense. I mean, that language is maybe it is the greatest form, and maybe it's why we have the word logos for Christ, because it is actively participating in reality. It is participation in reality. So anyway, so I'm just going to turn that like a little bit to use some language that I have used for this, just to marry it to what you're saying, but and to marry it to a little bit of what Barfield is saying. I've been using this notion of power and authority, basically, and understanding the difference between power and authority as power as cause and effect, and authority as call and response. And these are sort of two different kinds of ecosystems, you might say. And you could see them almost like as call and response is the economy of heaven, and cause and effect is the economy of earth, or at least the deeper parts of earth. And so you don't want to sort of replace one with the other. They are meant to marry each other in a sense. But it does seem like as we move further from I would say that true participation is a marriage of call and response and cause and effect that is governed by call and response, that is governed by heaven, basically. And that when you lose participation, it is usually, and especially this is the case in modernity, it is because you literally stop believing in authority. You stop believing in the unseen movement of things, which I would say is moved by call and response, and you start believing that everything is cause and effect. And then you want to move everything by the levers of cause and effect. You want to move everything by the levers of power. Obviously, this is like, the whole postmodern critique or whatever is just like everything is power. There is no such thing as authority anymore. But that had, probably already made itself real by the time of Nietzsche or something like that. It's just kind of like kings can only be kings by power. They can no longer be kings by authority. And so anyway, I think part of reclaiming this original participation, let's say, I think, and part of, let's say, trying to move these high level things into embodied action is, I think, for Christians to reclaim an authoritative relationship in the world, as opposed to simply giving in to the strictures of cause and effect that everything wants you to do, including college and public school and all those sorts of things. They're just kind of like, how do we use these levers to control the world? As opposed to, and so anyway.
So what this pops in my mind is that we had a conversation in my church about the notion of two people being brought in as elders. So it was the
Yeah.
first experience I had of being part of church governance. So I entered, there was already, three, maybe four elders. And then while I was there, two elders. And, a group of people showed up, by the way. There was just an invitation, anybody, some 30 people show up, and you kind of look around and you're like, okay, I know who these people are. There's a reason why this is the people who show up. And there's a conversation, should these people be promoted into the position of elder?
Yeah.
And the horizontal vertical axis that you're articulating was very present in that conversation. And what was interesting, of course, is that for most people, the lens was the lens of power.
Right.
And it's as Americans, we tend to think about the lens of power in a watered down separation of powers control structure. So,
yes.
Okay, what we're talking about is basically who's going to be kind of the governance of the church. I even use the language, which of course is like, cybernetic control system. Who's in charge, who's making decisions. It starts to feel a little bit like Robert's Rules of Order or board. How does a board put together an executive team, that kind of thing. And what I said was coming entirely from the point of view of authority. My wife actually, oddly enough, she asked the question, like, what does this even mean? Like, how do we even think about this? And I said, well, I have a thought. And the thought is, we're not deciding, we're discerning. If they are in fact elders, they are elders. That's all there is to it. Right? God has appointed certain people to be elders in this church at this moment. That is already done. That's coming down from heaven. All we're endeavoring to do is to discern that is the case. And you will notice in your heart, you already know that it's true. Right? It's obvious to me that these two people are already elders, and we're merely putting the signature on it so that we can see it. Like we talked about the crucible of the word.
Exactly.
The transcendent is descending into the language. The sound I make out of my mouth is like the least important part of it.
Right. But it still makes us sub-creators, right? It still it allows us to be
it is actual participation.
Reality
it's
makers.
Not zero. Yes. It's a lot more than zero. And so that notion of the ability to notice, what is it like to acknowledge authority, and then to acknowledge how do we relate to authority? Like, what does it mean to operate in that mode? Because we have so much unconscious assumption about how to navigate reality on the basis of rococo versions of power. Oh man, so interesting. This conversation is very hot right now in certain approaches around evolutionary biology.
Yeah.
Michael Levin's work is starting to create just a huge amount of verticality.
I think he's like unearthing call and response reality in the midst of a world that has been dominated by cause and effect lens.
Pure cause and effect, yeah. So yes, I completely agree.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
It's providential. It's the power of it, and the fact that he's getting there through just being honest, rigorous, and brilliant is awesome.
Yeah. I think it's funny. There's another guy, Dennis Noble. I don't know if you're familiar with him. I think he's maybe a physicist, or maybe he's a biologist. There's a couple of those brilliant Oxford guys they have like multiple PhDs, and he's one of them. But anyway, he has been doing this work on the he's been talking about the Human Genome Project, and he sort of uses that to make some very similar points to Levin, where he says, look, we mapped the whole human genome as thinking that things were just things bouncing off of each other, and then if you could just figure out like, oh, this one is what's causing your heart palpitations, we'll just remove that gene and, put in the healthy version of it or whatever, then it would work. And we've literally solved nothing by mapping. Maybe the one thing that we solved was discovering that this is not what runs the human body.
Right.
That like once you map everything, it turns out that it does not have a cause and effect structure to it.
Right.
But when you start, you find a problematic thing and you remove it, you watch all these other things start thinking and being like, oh, wait, we need to we're just going to use an entirely other thing to replace that thing. And then you're like, oh, it's not even the gene that I was looking at anymore. Now another gene is doing that job.
Yeah.
So anyway, he comes to a similar, I guess it's the sort of stylish thing to say these days, a kind of panentheism sort of thing, but it's stylish for a reason, right? Because there does seem to be a consciousness at that
so level. Can I shift a little bit to the very concrete?
Yeah, please.
As it turns out, our church has kicked off a project called the Hub. So the insight that came out of the elders of the church, which by the way, I'm not a member of, I'm not an elder, I'm just a dude, a member of the church.
Yeah. Yeah.
was that a different identity altogether has to be, how do I say this right? The incubator for other churches. And I mean, what I mean is something like sort of two or three models that are received. One model is the church plant model. So we
Yeah.
take a flotilla
This is
of
what I wanted to
people,
talk about. Good.
we
Yeah.
we send them elsewhere, and we have a template. We have kind of like a franchise. So they have a code that they can run, and they plant in wherever they are. In our particular case, let's say they came from Charlotte and they came to Swananoa and they planted, and they're now whatever, whatever brand it is. So it's Starbucks. Like it's basically Starbucks. It's a franchise model.
Yeah. Yeah.
Church
Yeah.
plant as franchise.
Yeah.
Um, you have just like the straight up split. Say, okay, well, we're just going to have 75 people go here and 75 people go there, and this pastor's going to go, this pastor's going to go there, and you could do it spatially or temporally. Like, okay, we're doing two services, same building, or we're doing one service, same time, two buildings. Those are
Yes.
identical as far as I can tell.
Yes.
Maybe slightly the same because time is a little easier to navigate, and there'll be kind of an intermediary period.
Right.
It doesn't matter because that approach terminates in the same direction after one more split.
Good point.
And then the third is something like, what the big capital C church did for, and both in the East and the West for thousands of years, which is the parish diocese model, which
Yeah.
is there's a vertical hierarchy that constrains and controls and sort of makes the identity of everything what it is, which is kind of like the franchise writ large.
Yes.
And then local churches are held to a maximum size, and every time that size gets bigger, a seed for a new parish enters from the outside, and then a new parish is formed, and you just kind of keep running that. And the key thing is the verticality is what governs that. Like you have a higher order
Yes.
thing that operates, and it has like in the Western church subsidiarity. So it's like, hey, we move up levels of hierarchy, only that which must be governed at certain levels of hierarchy. So the diocese does not control X, Y, and Z. But maintains the integrity of what's happening at the lower level, so that the local parish church is in fact an actual Catholic church that is fungible with other Catholic churches in the matters that matter.
Yep.
I'm not sure if that's actually different from this franchise model, though I feel like it's different in certain very important ways. Like it's because obviously it stood the test of time. It's a franchise model that has gone through enough iterations to have done the very important complexity stuff that's very difficult to do in design.
Yeah.
So the thesis is that none of those are going to be right. None of those are right.
Mm-hmm.
We have as post-reformed Christians, we have an intuitive and maybe even conceptual understanding of why the Catholic model didn't work. Right, it failed
Mm-hmm.
historically in particular ways. The vertical hierarchy at a certain level creates capturable institutions, and for whatever reason, the Spirit chose not to make that not happen. So it can happen. The franchise model, as we understand it in Protestant land, is about. Oh, sorry. The other one is the last branch is megachurchification. You can just keep
Yeah.
growing,
Yeah. Of course. Yeah. You just keep growing. Yeah.
and we can sort of present the reasons for why that also can't work.
Right.
So the thesis they're coming up with is something like there needs to be some kind of center that is separate from the point of view of identity. It's a different organization that contain. Sorry, to make this conceptual a little bit easier, think about this in terms of phenotype and genotype. So it contains the oisa, the essence of what makes the church what it is, why people actually go there, but
Mm-hmm.
at a high enough level of transcendent abstraction that it's able to convey the essence at the participatory level, so that a body can then express that essence in the way that is true to who they actually are. In this case, simply, they would maybe if they do it in French instead of in English, right?
Right. Right.
But whatever your friends in North Carolina will do, your guys in the Outer Banks will do it differently than my guys in the mountains.
Yeah.
But if we have the same essence, and this is very back to the Greek, if we have the same ouisa, then it's begotten. Right? So we're participating in the Trinitarian sensibility, right? The begottenness.
Yeah.
Each church is begotten from the same Father. So there's a
Yes.
genetic,
Carries the seed.
it carries the
Yeah.
seed, exactly. There's kinship. We're not cloning, right? The franchise model is a clone, and
Yeah.
clones
Okay. Okay.
fail
I
for
see.
that reason.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
begotten model is to say, hey, there is differentiation. The Son is not the Father. There's differentiation that is good and necessary, but there is also unity that is good and necessary. And the Trinity shows us how to do this, right? They are Father and Son, and they share the same Spirit. Right? They are participating in difference through begottenness, but they're participating in sameness through relationship, and in relation, a certain quality of relationality, and they're participating in sameness through begottenness. Begottenness is differentiation and unity simultaneously.
Yeah.
And so the insight, and I don't think anyone I just said was part of what they were thinking, but the insight was we need to actually create something that is like a different identity. The church can't clone itself, but there's something that operates over here that is never the church, but is somehow like the womb in which the seed is implanted, and it is then able to birth churches that are kin and maintain that kinship for kinship reasons, but are
Yes.
not clone. Right? So that's
Yes.
kind of where we are. And I mean, literally, we haven't even begun the process of doing that.
Okay. Wait. So this is really helpful. Maybe it's both because it's kind of like a mixture of metaphors or whatever. But do you see this? Let's call it organization that is birthing churches as being the womb or the seed, like the element that is carrying the essence.
It's a very, very good question. I think, in point of fact, I think it's actually both.
Okay. Yeah.
So and let me just add a little bit more to it, because I think this is right. Because it seems right. I think we're going to go in this direction. I think there's an intuitive guide or a spirit guide, that the hub will also be doing things that are of the, like building schools.
Yeah. Okay. Now we're just totally on the same page.
The hub
Yeah.
will also be doing things that are part of the embodiment of the church in ways that are properly in the context of the church, or say the context of the sacred, the context of the commons, that
Yeah.
are outside of the proper role of the Eucharistic expression,
Yes. Got it.
but maintain continuity of expression, like the main continuity of essence in diversities of expression, right? So let's say that the seed is in heaven. That's right. The hub is the
Okay.
womb. The seed is in heaven. The
Yep.
hub has is very particularly that which enables the embodiment of the seed to be
Yes.
supported and nurtured until that embodiment is able to exit into the world and begin to participate in the world as
Become a body.
such. Yeah. So the hub
Yeah.
is the womb. The seed is heaven. The womb is receptive to the seed. Yeah, yeah. I mean the egg, right? Because you got the whole complexity here, but I mean the metaphor falls apart a little bit, but we're okay.
For sure.
Because obviously we introduced heaven into the story, so it's not strictly cause and effect.
Metaphors are meant to fall apart at some point. So.
And therefore has as its unique capability, it can give birth to an arbitrarily large number of distinct expressions, some of which will be distinct expressions of the Eucharistic version of the seed, some of which will be expressions of vocational, right? Versions.
Other needs of the body.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Which are not.
that is where we are.
That's where you are. Okay, you guys are ahead. You're way ahead of me. Just because I want to continue to compare notes with you, I want you to know kind of where we are. I have to address all this now, but our moment is that there are a number of us, small group of us, it's kind of a growing group that is talking and planning a sort of future church form for our area.
Yep.
And so far, we're assuming we have one priest in training. He hasn't been ordained yet, but he's doing his residency in an Anglican church in Richmond, finishing seminary. The church in Richmond knows they're sort of training him for this purpose, come back to our town and to begin one parish, which will be kind of at this point in the Anglican tradition. And so we're sort of far along in the sense that we have a a tradition and a person and a few people on the ground here. It's still about 2 years out, probably, because that's just how long residencies take, and probably how long it'll take us to make anything happen anyway.
Yeah.
But it is to the point of like, okay, we should probably like talk to more people so we can, raise funds and do what needs to be done. But the notion is, and this is where things get weird, because it's very similar to your situation, is not just to have a church. It is like, we have a suspicion that when we do this, it will become very quickly a 300 person or more. Because keep in mind, there's a lot of people in our town, but also in my circle or whatever. And so that is, it is a problem in a sense, because it could very quickly undermine the thing that we're aiming for. And the thing that we're aiming for is to the same problem that you're trying to address, which is to slowly, maybe not quickly, but slowly have neighborhood place-centric places of worship.
Yeah.
And I would go to the next extent of saying, maybe even place-centric schools, and
Yep.
and then maybe even further than that, sort of a place-centric economy, a way of reshaping our weird soulless suburb into a series of villages. But that would be the 8 generation sort of method.
I would say that when you say place-centered school or education,
yeah,
you have also by necessity said place-centric economy.
Yes, you're right. Yes, yes.
Because if you're not providing particularly young men with jobs, then you're not educating anybody.
Right.
You're creating all kinds of hazard.
And so apprenticeship models is already a big part of what we've been doing.
Exactly.
And the fellows program that I'm running, all that.
And the handoff is there, right? You've got all these boomers that are like fragilely ready to exit. They need to exit.
Yes.
And have nothing behind them. And say, hey, is there a way for us to transition this into apprentice who will take over? And by the way, there's even an economic model for how you can do a slow buyout. So literally transition ownership of functioning businesses. And there's trillions of dollars of actual like real hands-on businesses in Virginia Beach, probably in the order of like billions. That need to be transitioned, and there needs to be a way to do it. So,
right.
So things to think about that I think are critical.
And same with church buildings, by the way. Like
same with church buildings.
Yeah.
A massive amount.
That would be my ideal. I don't want to go building stuff that doesn't need to be built when the buildings are already there, that are going to be torn down and turned into like an Aldi, which is what happened at the end of my neighborhood.
Yeah. And neighborhoods don't need Aldis. Neighborhoods need churches.
No. Yes.
Aldis are perfectly fine to be plugged into at the end of a freeway.
Sure, exactly. But now it's the reverse. It's the freaking churches at the end of the freeway and the Aldis that are in the neighborhoods where the church used to be.
There's something to think about that just occurred to me, but I think it's very useful, is if you think about it from the point of view of human needs, and particularly human needs in the context of communion and like the Trinitarian sensibility. One of the challenges that we often have is because the church is evaporated into just the Sunday get together, it ends up having to carry a lot more relational weight than is actually proper. And so you get the experience, like I certainly get the experience that like on Sunday, people show up before church, they hang out for an hour afterwards. Like they're actually trying to do more than is plausible in, Sunday. And therefore it creates a pressure, because as the church begins to grow in populace, its ability to meet all of its diverse needs is less and less capable.
Yeah.
But if you're saying, hey, I've actually got, and of course, the next move we make is, we also have house church. Okay, so Wednesday has this, and like, yeah, kind of. Right? House church it's useful, we need it, but there's more to it. But if you start saying, hey, I have like 5 touch points, where some are touch points around the level of like pure conviviality, like where we're just going to get together. Let's get together groups of like 40 or 50, and anybody who wants to come. 40, like a big pot, but it's too big to do a structured house church kind of thing, but it's big enough to actually allow people to enter into human relationships in a sacred container, right? It's being done within the context of the church, which by the way is, commonplace in real life communities. It's not a novel thing. And maybe do that monthly, like a monthly family dinner, kind of a get together. Maybe more.
Yes.
I mean, from my point of view, even more often. But I'm not logistically responsible.
Right.
Um, the touch point of school, like, hey, now I've got this every single day of the week. You know, kids are getting together with other kids in some fashion, or even if it's just the other kids in their family, and they're
Yeah.
and they're putting time and attention. Well, if I can have the touch point of school now also be crossed with the church, and I
Ah,
had,
yes.
this crosses in different ways, that's another touch point. And, moms, when, if you get like 5 or 6 families that are coming together and the kids are all working on some project and the moms are there, but they're not responsible for their kids, the moms are going to be doing a tremendous amount of valuable cross fertilization of all kinds
Yes.
of things, but some of which may just be straight up emotional processing of traumas that have been kind of in the system. But all again under the heading of the church, right? Still within the container of the church, and just liturgical processes. Like, hey, we're entering in. We're all going to sit and pray. We'll say a prayer together as we enter into this space. We'll all be consciously, just having liturgical beat in the beginning in the process of where we're going. So it's not just formally under the church; it's liturgically in the access of the church. But you have a number of different touch points that are hitting human needs, but you're spreading it across enough logistical contexts that no one is trying to carry more than it can properly carry.
And practically speaking, the womb is where there's a liturgical womb as
Yes,
opposed to
that's right.
the liturgical churches, the liturgical parishes, let's say,
Yes.
um, which is giving birth to these parishes is itself. Okay, so to what degree is this womb a parish? Like, to what degree is this womb like a
Or it's
place of?
my guess is it's probably at the level of diocese. My guess is it probably could scale to about that level, like 12 parishes or so.
Okay, and but the womb itself is more like it's like a bishop, but it's not a person. It's a
Right.
bishop that is
Right.
a community. It's a
Yeah.
bishop that is a church almost. I
Yeah.
don't know. And so then if this were to develop over a generation or two, would the womb end up being a sort of communal bishop that has representatives from all the parishes, or would it be its own parish that is kind of the mother church from which all these other things are born?
Mm. The former. But the former more like how funny. Like maybe the thing that replaces the university. So imagine that you've got
Very
it's
interesting.
not like a democratic representative. It's more like an actual embodied member of a
Participational
family. Yeah. So people
participational
from a diverse
representatives.
parishes come and they live there and they share in the kind of the unplannable way that happens when people are just in the same place, focusing on the same kind of thing for a period of time. And there's stuff that you can't think about, but as you're living it, you're like, wait a minute, that's kind of a weird way you're doing it. That's interesting. And it just kind of gets absorbed. And so it's a sort of this mutual transmission that's happening in the context of a context that allows it to occur. Um, because the bishop is at the level of heaven. Right?
Yeah,
So the
yeah,
seed is heaven, and the body has to be a body that has plurality, and the plurality is going to be vocational. Right? There are people for whom participation in this part of the church is proper, but they are not going to be institutional in the sense that there'll be a movement out and a movement in. Right, so you'll sort of sojourn for a while in this location. Think of like a monastic. Now I'm taking the monastery, university, and can kind of go into the
yeah. Sure, yeah,
participatory
yeah.
origin of that, which is, um, maybe you go and spend a year in this location and you participate and you're doing the work of it, and you're also conveying part of the soul of the place that you're and the people you're coming from into this, and you're of course absorbing a lot of the soul of the larger group that's there, and then you go back to your parish, and maybe some people will even be there for like a longer period, like 3 to 5 years, but still there's no permanence, right? There's no sort of like vertical only, unless, by the way, that's what God wants. I mean, I don't know, it's beyond my
Sure.
above my pay grade.
This is so interesting. All right, can I ask another practical question
Yeah.
about this? So, do you, when you have to deal with things like funding the necessary resources or real estate for said parish or school that the womb is birthing, does the funding and funding decision making still kind of center on this I don't know what word you want me to use, this womb, or does it center on the thing that's being, you say like, all right, we're going to start a new
I think there's a third piece of the ecclesia.
uh-huh.
I think this is the deacon. I think the deaconate has its own, it has its own scriptural identity, and I think it has its own geometric position. So the deaconate is in some sense from the womb, right? It is born from the seed, and also has a almost parallel identity to the church and to the womb, or to the hub. We're calling it that. Or the womb, maybe a stronger language, although a little bit more challenging. And the deaconate has at least two significant responsibilities. You can think of it as like the most masculine of the characteristics. It has defense, like how do you actually create boundaries and protect, up to and including, by the way, armed response, right? Because that's where we are. That's the reality.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
And it has defense in the sense of resource. So those things that come out of the womb that produce and participate in resource, some portion of the deaconate will also have responsibilities. So like when boys are moving into the apprenticeship mode that's coming out of the womb, as they move into the role of actually running businesses, there may be something that's happening at the level of the deaconate, maintaining the integrity and the continuity of what's happening at the level of like the economy. As the divine economy is operating, the deacons are doing the thing like saying, hey, it's funny. I actually was working on this yesterday in a different context. When someone has actually, I'm sure there's a very precise language for this, but I don't know it. Defection, we have that language in economics. When someone is defecting against the body, that fact is special. There's a unique reality when somebody is actually moving from being we have it in the Bible. What's the guy's name who like hid the money? He like gave some money and hid some?
Oh, Ananias and Sapphira.
Oh,
Ananias and Sapphira.
Yeah. So
is that what you're talking about in the book of Acts?
This is the Ananias protocol. Right? So the deaconate has a certain responsibility for the Ananias protocol, because there will be many, many circumstances where various people will show up and they'll be Ananias. Obviously, I got to put it in there. And Ananias needs to be zapped. That's all there is to it. Right?
And what's so interesting about him being zapped is that I think the reason he was zapped is it was like death by holiness. It was because of what you're talking about. It was because even the sort of financial planning of this community was happening in a liturgically like holy environment, in the presence of God. He wasn't like put to death by some kind of substrate or something like that. He like died by the Spirit.
Yep,
it was as though he walked into the Holy of Holies.
Yeah.
But in the Holy of Holies now, they're talking financial things.
Yes. Yeah.
That's related to what you're saying.
Yeah, that's very related. And so that I think is a irreducible part of the geometry that is not the same as the previous two. So you like the Eucharist, you have
agreed, absolutely,
and then you have the deaconate. And I think those
the ordination of deacons is a huge part of what seems like it's missing from just the church at large. Like that needs to be a central piece to this puzzle.
I completely agree. Central piece. And it's funny because the lack of it, you can see it. Like you see why it shows up the way that it shows up in how the church, where the church fails, like in the context of culture and in the context of its encounter with culture. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
We're going to have to wrap this up.
I know. Yeah. No, this has been very long. All right, good. Let's wrap it up. Thank you. This is
great.
All right. Yeah. We're more in parallel, places than I thought, in a pleasing way. So I'm going to continue to compare notes with you on this, but I really appreciate your wisdom here.
I consider this to be the most important thing in the world, so it has high priority for me.
Good. That was one of the questions I texted you was, do you still think this is pretty much central to the church to like, So the answer is yes.
My brother.
Agreed. All right, man. Thank you for talking.
Yeah,
really appreciate your time.
Bye-bye.
See ya.